Hi Guava Bees, and welcome to another episode of the Dear Guava Bean podcast. Remember, submit your questions in the sandbox or on the website, and we could be answering yours in the next episode. I'm Francesca, and with me is Claire.
Hello.
And today's question is from Matt, who asks, Dear Guava Bean, now that I'm freelance and I've been fortunate enough to be able to quit my full-time job, I'd like to go traveling and live the life of a digital nomad. But I trialed this last week on a short holiday, and everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. Internet signal kept dropping out, I was in a super hot van with no desk, and in a tiny village in Serbia with no internet cafes. I know this is a pretty exceptional set of circumstances, but it made me wonder if I can do it full-time on a permanent basis while moving around constantly. I'd love to hear some advice and tips on how to back myself up to ensure I am as prepared as I can be when I go traveling. Okay. So I think that digital nomading is definitely kind of increasing in popularity. Like, there is no wonder why. It sounds like it could be an amazing opportunity for anyone who wants to try it. Personally, for me, I've never done that kind of thing. What about you, Claire? Have you?
Yeah, I've done a bit. I mean, part of the advantage of being able to work online for me was so I could travel. And so I definitely try to take advantage of it as much as possible. But I also know, like, this question, like, so many things can go wrong if you're stuck without internet. Like, some of the most stressful work moments I've had have been in other countries where I just can't get good signal, and like I'm struggling to get on a meeting. Ooh, things can really go bad. I love digital nomading. I think everybody should experience it. And yeah, have you not worked? Like, when you travel, do you take your work with you?
So I do. I've travelled a fair bit in the last couple of years, but I guess I kind of don't really class it as digital nomading. I don't know why. I mean, I guess it's more of just like something I have to do because I want to go and like go to an event or something like that, rather than being like a lifestyle choice. You know, I still have a permanent residence. You know, I work from home. I've never planned to kind of just live somewhere else for months at a time and move around like a lot of digital nomads do. Although I'm not a digital nomad, I obviously have travelled and worked at the same time. And so there are some things that I would say I can relate to. So I guess the one big thing is just like a stable internet connection, like you said, Claire, like especially if you're having meetings and stuff like that, or you have to be at work at a specific time. That kind of stuff is so stressful because if something goes wrong, well, you know, you're kind of stuck. You know, what you're supposed to do, you have to kind of have a backup plan. So for me, when I've traveled, there have been times where I've worked with clients and I've needed to be on phone calls or meetings, or I've needed to be available for their customers between certain hours, and I haven't managed to do that because of something that's gone wrong, usually internet. So now I'm lucky because most of my work is project-based, so I can do it whenever I like. As long as it meets the deadline, then that's okay. And I tend to find that kind of work is easier when traveling. I don't know. What do you think, Claire? What have your experiences been personally? How much have you traveled when you've been working? Because I've only done it, as I say, a little bit in the last couple of years, really.
So every year I try to do at least 2 trips outside the country where I will go for at least 2 weeks, you know, and I'll work at the same time. But I will say that I don't like to hop around a lot. Like, if I'm going to do that, if I'm actually going to take my work with me, I would like to just like fly into one city and get a hotel or an apartment, and then I'll stay there, and then I'll just do like day trips around the city to get to know the area I'm in. If I'm gonna actually travel like every couple days, be in a different city or a different town and be like with a group of friends, that is when I find it doesn't work. Because you're with other people, everybody has their own schedule. They don't want to wait for you to do your work. So I schedule certain times where I call them my work trips, you know, like my work vacations. And I consider it both a vacation and work because I get to travel and I take my work with me, but I'm also usually staying at a nice hotel or a nice place. And I go and do like a lot of touristy things in that city. But then I also have my other trips where I do serious travel traveling where I'm like with friends and we're like hopping to city from city to city. And on those trips, I always try to take time off work. I try to not work when I'm doing that kind of traveling. And so I guess it depends a lot on the type of traveling that you want to do. If you want to move around constantly, you're going to need a very stable job. And you're going to need a job that doesn't require you to be online at certain hours of the day. Like you said, project-based, where you can just submit your work on a deadline. That I definitely think if you're going to move around all the time, you need a really stable job and you need clients that understand that you're going to be traveling and you might be offline for certain days at a time, but you will deliver, because that really freaks clients out. Like if they can't contact you for a couple days, or like you're on an airplane and they can't get a hold of you and they freak out and then you freak out and it's a whole deal. So it really takes a lot of planning and a lot of preparation. I wouldn't do it unless you really feel comfortable traveling and working, and you know that you can balance both at the same time.
I think because it is quite a serious decision to make to actually go digital nomading. So I like the idea that Matt has done like a trial on a short holiday to see if it's for him without kind of making that plunge and going for it and not knowing whether it's going to work. Like you've said, I think for you like to kind of schedule, a couple of weeks traveling. You don't actually like to move around a lot. I'm the same. I like to kind of know exactly where I'm going to be and when. So some people are not like that. Some people travel and they just go around every week. They're somewhere new and they find that exciting. So like you say, I think it depends on what kind of freelancer you are and what you want out of your experience. I think another thing is that's probably the most important is that your clients, when you have them, know that this is the way that you live, so that they know that you're going to be traveling. Sometimes you might not be available, and really just to make them aware that you can be contacted and, this is when you can be contacted, but sometimes you will be traveling. So they're not, like you say, freaking out over if you're unavailable or something. I think another thing I just wanted to mention too is Matt said everything that went wrong. And sometimes that is just inevitable. You can't control those things, but what you can do is prepare as much as possible. So now that you know these things can go wrong, have some backups in place so that you know that if something like that does happen, then you know what you're going to do next. So I think what can be really helpful is maybe speaking to some other digital nomads who are currently traveling or have traveled in the countries or the cities that you're looking to travel, so you can get some advice on, for example, are there internet cafes? Where can you stay in wherever you're going, and that kind of thing that you might not be able to necessarily know until you get there. So I would definitely advise people to jump in the sandbox. We have like a digital nomad section. So if you want to chat to other people who are traveling, that is the perfect place to do it, because you can just share advice with people. And that is so helpful, is to speak to somebody who already has experience doing it. And I know there's a few Facebook groups and things as well for digital nomads as well, which can also be really helpful. But really my advice would just be to, as I say, speak to other people who've already done it and learn from these experiences. The things that went wrong, they went wrong, but there's something to learn from. So just to remember what to do next time and use that as, almost like a guidance on what to avoid next time and, what to expect as well. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. After like one or two of those situations, you learn to be very careful about internet signal and all of that stuff. Like that is my number one concern when I travel. When I go to like a hotel or something, I will always read the reviews first to see if people say that the internet wasn't good. Because if they say the internet was fast, then I know like, okay, I'm going to stay there. But if they say the internet was bad, you always got to know, because there's nothing worse than being stuck with no internet when you really need to send out an email or you really need to just get this thing done. That to me is a nightmare. So nowadays, whenever I travel, I always make sure I'm staying somewhere that has good internet. And I make sure by like reading the comments, it's a little bit of extra work that you have to go through. But obviously, if you want to have all the advantages of being a digital nomad, you got to prepare. And the cost of that is doing your research, like you say, talking to other digital nomads and asking them like, hey, has anyone been to Serbia? Where did you guys get good internet? Would you recommend it for other digital nomads? And then, have that conversation, see if you can get some good advice. But internet is always going to be like number one for me. I always make sure that I buy internet before I leave the airport whenever I travel. So like usually when you land in an airport, if you're in a new country, they usually sell SIM cards and they will set you up with internet right there and then. I always try to get internet before I leave the airport, because that's super important. And you can always like hotspot internet from your phone to your laptop if needed, if you have a phone that can do that. And so be prepared with like these little backups, because I've often had to like hotspot internet in order to just be able to send out emails and check on clients and stuff. So you got to learn to become pretty savvy with, you know, getting Wi-Fi, getting your batteries charged, carrying around chargers if you need them to, and then also thinking about like, where am I going to be staying? Is it going to be a hot van with no desk? Maybe that's not a good idea. And so prepare, you know, try to set yourself up to have as good an experience as possible. That is really the number one thing that you have to do in order to be a digital nomad. You just have to set yourself up to have a great experience. And in order to do that, you got to be super prepared.
Exactly. And I feel like what you said there about having the best experience. I think sometimes with freelancing and traveling, you're kind of concerned about cost and, you know, being able to afford to travel and have everything you need and eat and stay places and have internet and all this stuff. But sometimes the cheaper option isn't always the best. So, you know, you might be staying somewhere which seems super cheap, but they have bad internet. Or you go to, say, you plan to go to cafes and hotspot off their internet there, and they kick you out after a certain time because they're closing, and then you've got nowhere to work and you're expected to finish a project. Obviously, it depends on where you stay too. So there's lots of cultural differences as well. So, you know, make sure that you understand if there's any like extra taxes on hotel rooms that you stay in, or, you know, whether there is good 4G, for example. Some sort of old phone boxes and things in some cities they are now Wi-Fi hotspots and you can tether off them. Some don't have that at all, and you're literally reliant on buying internet yourself, like you've mentioned already. I've personally, you know, traveled myself and thought I prepared everything, and then it turned out it wasn't what I expected. I think it is really about having that good experience, but it's not always necessarily going to be the cheapest option. You know, could you stay somewhere that is a bit more expensive, but they have super fast internet, you know, over somewhere cheaper, but then you have to go and buy a SIM card, you know, mobile broadband and everything else that goes on top of it. It's about weighing up your options and the pros and cons to make your job easy, and also make sure you're having fun as well. Like while you're traveling, you don't want it to be super stressful. You don't want to constantly be worrying that something's going to go wrong and not being prepared for it, you know?
I definitely think that digital nomading is kind of, you know, made out to be this like ideal lifestyle that all freelancers have. But in reality, it's very difficult to do because you have to work and travel. Traveling takes time, work takes time, and then you still got to fit in time to do all the touristy fun things that you want to do. And so it's really not all, you know, what is it called? Butterflies and roses, or like rainbows and bunnies. It's really not all that. I know a few people that like are pretty serious digital nomads that travel to like 10 different countries in 1 year, and they don't hop around too much. They get one place, they stay in that place for a month or 2 months, and then they move on to the next place. It's very difficult to like hop from city to city or do like a road trip in a van and try to work at the same time. I think you just got to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt and realize that there's a lot of advantages to digital nomading, but there's also a lot of disadvantages, and you got to be really well prepared to face a little bit of those disadvantages if you want to have that lifestyle.
I agree. I think sometimes Instagram and things have, we can blame that for like the idyllic pictures of like sitting on a beach with a laptop, because it isn't like that for the most part. You can do that like sometimes, but most of it is going to be kind of planning, figuring out what you need to do and just being prepared, because running a freelancing business is challenging enough. But then if you put all of the planning and for different eventualities and things when you're traveling on top of that, that is super stressful. So I think to recap, what I was saying is literally just ask as many other digital nomads as you can what they do in certain countries and cities and things, because it does vary a huge amount depending on where you travel, and also just learning from those things that have already gone wrong. So just having things prepared ready, and so you know what's going to happen, and if something goes wrong, you know, we can't change that. Things do go wrong, but being prepared is such a key point. So then you can just do your work and make sure you're keeping your clients happy without stressing about everything else on top of that too.
Yeah, really smart points. One thing that I've noticed here is that Matt's saying, like, now that I'm freelance and been fortunate enough to be able to quit my full-time job. So it seems like he's a new freelancer and then he's trying to go traveling at the same time. And I think that's really difficult because when you're a new freelancer, you're still learning the ropes of, managing your time, setting up a good work routine, getting really solid clients. And so if you're a new freelancer and you're trying to go traveling at the same time, like that is quite difficult to do. I don't suggest people try that unless you are already very comfortable in your freelancing life. Like if you've already been freelancing for a while, you have a solid routine, you have clients that are comfortable with you traveling, and you've planned out a trip and you want to try it out, then go for it. But if you're still brand new to freelancing and you're trying to be a digital nomad now, that is difficult. And I think you put yourself and your work at risk when you try things out like that if you're not 100% prepared for it. And so I would suggest that people, really get solid in freelancing first, build up a really good client base, build up a really good planning system and a daily work routine. So, every day I'm going to wake up at this time, I'm going to do this work first, and then I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to come back and do this work next. And you have a solid routine that you feel comfortable with. Then you're like, okay, I think I can take this on the road now. I think I'm ready for the life of a digital nomad. That is kind of how I would approach it. I did not try to go traveling like this right away. The times when I did try it, it was just so stressful and so difficult that I kind of had to learn how to be a freelancer before I could learn how to be a digital nomad.
Those are some amazing points that I hadn't even thought about, but you're 100% right. Back to talking about becoming a freelancer, there are so many different things you need to learn to then travel on top of that. Yeah, that's going to be super stressful. And also, if you are new to freelancing, and without kind of wanting to launch into any horror stories, but I do know of a freelancer who I used to work alongside for a company we used to work for. And she decided to go traveling with her boyfriend. They were both freelancers. And unfortunately, one of her invoices didn't get paid and she didn't have any savings. So she was kind of stuck in a country, not knowing what to do until she got paid. And obviously, I'm not saying that's going to happen to every digital nomad, but it is a possibility. So it's also worth mentioning that to travel, you probably need to have some savings and you need to be pretty secure in knowing what's coming in every month and that you can afford to fund your travel and to stay where you are as well. To be, I guess, responsible with the money that you have and the money that you earn before you go traveling, because you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you don't know what you're doing next because you've run out of money or your client hasn't paid you or something like that, So it is a lot to think about. It is serious, it's a serious decision. It can be amazing. I'm sure it's amazing, if you can figure it out and it works for you. And everybody's different, but I think I agree with you, Claire. I think it's taking maybe one step at a time and just making sure you're comfortable before you move to the next bit.
Yeah, I like that story. Even though it is scary, it's a very real possibility. And I think people get a little bit too caught up in like the digital nomading because everybody would love to do that. Like I would love to travel all the time, but realistically, I need to have my routines. I need to be waking up at the same time every day in the same place, eating healthy food in order for me to do my best work. And so I found that, traveling and work, it doesn't really go hand in hand unless you're really good at one or the other. You have to be really good at both or really, really comfortable in one in order to really make it a success. So I think it's worth telling these stories and letting people know, because also when I've traveled, I've had clients that really didn't like that, and I've lost clients because they just didn't like the inconsistency of it. They thought, oh, you're more concerned with traveling than you are with working. Like you're not a serious employee. And so they would prefer to hire someone who stayed put and was like online at the same time every day versus hiring someone that was a little bit more volatile and a little bit more unpredictable. And so that's one thing to keep in mind also.
Yeah, it can definitely be frightening for clients, especially if they've never worked with freelancers before. And also, if you're coming from a full-time job into freelancing, that flexibility, that free time can feel like a luxury. You can now go places where you couldn't before because you'd have to book time off and ask your boss if it was okay to. So it's amazing. It's a real benefit, but just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should, or you shouldn't yet, maybe, if you're not ready to. I think it's wonderful to have that flexibility, but, not planning for it can maybe put you in a bad situation or a situation where you don't know what's going to happen next. And I think, like you've already said, Claire, and I won't go on about it too much, but just to kind of do one thing at a time before you move on, because there will inevitably be things that do go wrong or don't go the way you planned, because that's life. And that's a lot trickier to handle if you're in a country maybe where you don't speak the language or you can't get online, and it makes it more difficult than if you're at home and everything's familiar and then you can deal with it. It does make it a lot easier if you have one place of, residence or where you work from. And like you say, with the routines, that stuff then just becomes second nature. So you can just focus more on making your clients happy and figuring out your freelancing business. And then once you've got that down pat, then maybe you can think about traveling later on. It's, they're great points I hadn't necessarily thought about. And that's probably because I'm not a digital nomad. So I think it does probably come from, the more experienced people out there who have traveled and have probably learned a lot of valuable lessons that way.
Yeah, I agree. So just to summarize, I guess, some advice and tips on how to back yourself up if you really want the life of a digital nomad, I would say, number one, talk to other digital nomads. Like Francesca said, get the scoop, find out where is good to stay and where's the best internet, and then have some savings so that if you get caught in a bad spot, like it's not the end of the world, you can always fly back home. You never want to put yourself in like a financially risky situation. And then I always suggest to get internet. Like, if you can, always get internet on your phone, even if it's going to cost an arm and a leg. Internet is so important to the work that we do. Like, you cannot afford to be at the mercy of internet cafes and hotels. And you must always have your own source of internet. And so even if you have to invest in a local SIM card, do it. Get internet. And if possible, I would suggest, if you're going to travel, try to stay in one place for at least a week, or I would say maybe like 2 weeks at a time, and don't just hop from city to city. If you stay for 2 weeks at a time, you have time to settle in, you can work, your clients can still see you consistently, and then you can still travel. Maybe it's a little slower than you might like, but I think the people that I know that are doing it the most successfully, they stay in every country like 2 months at a time. They don't just hop from country to country, because that gets exhausting and difficult. And so if you are going to do this, plan somewhere that you can go and stay for a month and, chill, and then move on to the next spot. If you're going to try to hop too much, I think that could really put a strain on your work. Okay, so I think that's all that we have on this topic. I'll try to include some links to some other digital nomading groups and maybe some resources for digital nomads on this topic. But I think we covered it in pretty good detail. It's all just about being prepared, being confident in your freelancing skills and having that really solid plan that you can always fall back on so that you're not stressed or struggling while you're doing your work.
Absolutely. I'll be really interested to hear from some digital nomads after this podcast goes out, because I really love to hear some stories about people traveling, because it's not something I've ever done. So I do find it kind of fascinating. And I really do hope that we've added a lot of good points that people can think about, because I think it's a really, as I said, quite a serious thing to do, but also have fun with it. And, that's the great thing about being a freelancer, is that we do have the opportunity to do this. It's not saying don't do it, but be really prepared. We hope this episode has helped you figure out what to do next. Now it's your turn, Guava Bees. Have you got a burning question that only Guava Bean can help answer? Submit your question in the sandbox or on the website, and we could be answering yours in the next episode. That's all from us. To all creatives, rebels, and digital nomads, keep working online and living free.
Want to know more about the Freelancer Sandbox? Visit guavabean.com/sandbox to start your free trial now.